The morning sun, barely clearing the neighbor's roof, cast long shadows across Alex's driveway. He stood frozen, a piece of half-eaten toast forgotten in his hand, as the deafening grind of metal and the heavy idle of an engine filled the air. His beloved beat-up sedan was being hoisted onto the back of a tow truck. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" Alex's voice, thick with disbelief and a rising tremor, cut through the noise. "That's my car. This is my driveway." The burly towhee, truck driver, cap pulled low, merely grunted, tightening a chain without a glance. Then, from the meticulously manicured lawn of the house next door, Karen, impeccably dressed and clutching a small dog that mirrored her own smugness, stepped into view. A faint, almost imperceptible smirk played on her lips as she adjusted her designer sunglasses, clearly relishing the spectacle. "Oh, Alex!" Her voice dripped with saccharine sweetness, utterly devoid of empathy. "I warned you about where you park. This is simply a matter of proper neighborhood decorum." Alex stared, his jaw slack. "Warned me? My driveway?" "What are you talking about?" he stammered, incredulous. "This is my property." Karen took a slow, deliberate sip from her travel mug, her eyes holding his, her smirk widening just a fraction. "Not according to the official report. Some people just don't understand boundaries. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a very important day ahead." She turned, a picture of self-satisfied triumph, and walked back towards her house. Alex watched her go, then looked back at his car, now fully lifted, tires dangling uselessly as the tow truck's engine roared, ready to pull away. I knew what frustration was, what anger felt like. Then Karen towed my car from my own driveway. That's when I learned. Some battles you don't just fight, you win. And I was about to teach Karen a lesson in winning she'd never forget. The tow truck began to move, pulling Alex's car out of his driveway and down the street, leaving him alone, a homeowner watching his own property disappear. The tow truck, with Alex's car a pathetic, dangling trophy, rumbled away, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. Alex's mind raced, a furious scramble of disbelief and outrage. He immediately pulled out his phone, fingers fumbling as he dialed 911, expecting some immediate, definitive action. "My car's just been towed from my own driveway," he blurted out, trying to keep his voice steady. "My neighbor, Karen, just did it." The operator, however, was coolly detached. "Sir, if it's a private property tow, that's typically a civil matter. We don't interfere with private tow companies unless there's a clear criminal act, like theft." Alex's frustration boiled over. It is theft. She doesn't have the right. But the operator only offered the standard advice. Contact the tow company, resolve it with your neighbor, maybe consult a lawyer. He hung up, defeated, the phone feeling heavy in his hand. He then stormed towards Karen's house, pounding on her perfectly painted front door, but she remained elusive. Through a sheer curtain he could just make out her silhouette, unmoving, enjoying his distress. He left angry voicemails, sent furious texts that went unanswered. The next call was to the tow company, a labyrinth of automated menus and indifferent customer service. After a long, infuriating wait, he was informed of the impound lot's location, miles away, and the exorbitant fees, the towing charge, the storage fee, the administrative processing fee. It felt like extortion. With no other choice, Alex hailed a ride, the silence of the journey amplifying his humiliation. At the desolate impound lot, surrounded by other forgotten vehicles, he grudgingly paid the exorbitant sum, the money leaving a bitter taste in his mouth, a tangible cost for Karen's arrogance. Retrieving his dented, dust-covered car, he felt a fresh wave of indignity wash over him. As he drove back, he caught a glimpse of Karen tending her prize-winning roses, a serene, almost triumphant smile on her face. She raised a hand in a small, condescending wave as he passed, a clear act of gloating. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, a quiet, dangerous resolve hardening in his gut. This wasn't just about a car, it was about a line that had been crossed, a blatant disregard for his space and peace. Karen had started this. He would finish it. The sting of the impound lot bill still burned in Alex's wallet, a constant, tangible reminder of Karen's petty tyranny. The sight of his car, now back in its rightful place in his driveway, offered little comfort. The violation felt indelible. He spent the next few days in a haze of simmering resentment, unable to shake the feeling of powerlessness. He'd tried the direct approach, the official channels, and they'd all led to dead ends, leaving him frustrated and feeling foolish. But the anger, instead of fading, began to crystallize into something colder, more focused, a burning desire for effective, unassailable retribution. He wasn't interested in childish pranks or shouted confrontations. He needed a solution that was legal, definitive, and delivered a consequence Karen couldn't simply brush off. His laptop became his battlefield, the internet his arsenal. He started with broad searches: neighbor disputes laws, property line, disputes towing, HOA rules private property. The initial results were overwhelming, a convoluted maze of municipal codes, obscure bylaws, and conflicting legal advice. He waded through endless forum threads reading about homeowners who had similar Karen encounters: a neighbor who complained about Christmas lights being too bright, another who called code enforcement over an unkempt lawn, a third who installed security cameras pointed directly at their patio. These stories, while validating his own frustration, also highlighted the difficulty of fighting someone like Karen, who operated within the ambiguous gray areas of minor infringements and weaponized bureaucracy. Many victims simply gave up, resigned to their fate, or moving away. Alex refused to be one of them. He kept digging, refining his searches. He specifically looked up zoning laws for his residential area, something he'd never thought about before. Pages of legalese scrolled by: R1 zones, R2 zones, setbacks, easements, permitted uses. It was mind-numbingly dull, but he pushed through, driven by a grim determination. As he delved deeper, a pattern began to emerge from the anecdotal evidence he found online and remembered from neighborhood gossip. Karen wasn't just a general busybody. She had a particular talent for identifying and exploiting perceived infractions. He recalled Mrs. Henderson from 2 blocks over being fined for a fence that was allegedly too tall after Karen had a very public disagreement with her about shared hedge trimming. Then there was the saga of the Garcia family's vibrant, slightly overgrown vegetable patch, which suddenly drew the attention of the city's weed abatement officer shortly after Karen was overheard complaining about unsightly gardening at a community barbecue. It became clear that Karen wasn't just reacting to things. She was actively seeking out minor infringements and then leveraging official channels to harass her neighbors. This wasn't random. It was a calculated pattern of behavior. The question wasn't if Karen was violating a rule, but which one. And could it be something big enough to hit her where it hurt? He cross-referenced names he saw pop up in local online. Community groups with property records, trying to piece together a history of Karen's litigious tendencies. He found old news articles about minor HOA disputes, even a mention of a past lawsuit filed by a previous neighbor over nuisance activity, though the details were vague. The more he learned, the more he realized Karen wasn't just petty. She was a master of weaponizing regulations. This realization shifted something in Alex. His personal grudge began to morph into a strategic challenge. If Karen played by the rules, even twisted them, then so could he. But he needed a bigger rule, a more impactful one. Days blurred into nights, fueled by caffeine and an almost obsessive focus. He started looking for something inherently contradictory to residential zoning. He scrolled through definitions of home occupation, accessory dwelling units, and commercial use. Most of it was boilerplate, designed to prevent noisy businesses or large-scale operations in quiet neighborhoods. Then, buried deep within a subsection on permitted non-residential uses in R1 zones, He found it, a clause detailing what constituted commercial activity. It wasn't just about having a storefront or heavy machinery. It was about the frequency of non-resident visitors, the volume of deliveries, the type of goods or services being exchanged, and whether it created an unreasonable burden on residential infrastructure. Suddenly, fragmented observations about Karen's house clicked into place. He'd often seen large, unmarked vans making deliveries to her house at odd hours, far too frequently for typical residential packages. He'd noticed a consistent, almost rhythmic stream of different cars pulling up to her driveway for short periods, their occupants quickly disappearing inside, only to emerge minutes later. He'd dismissed it as her entertaining guests or receiving large online orders, but now a flicker of suspicion ignited. He recalled a conversation he'd overheard at the community picnic months ago, a snippet about Karen having a little side business that keeps her busy. He'd forgotten it then, but now it resurfaced with startling clarity. What if this side business wasn't a quaint hobby but something that actually crossed the line into commercial activity? He thought about her perfectly manicured lawn, the overly elaborate holiday decorations that seemed to draw onlookers every year, almost like a public display. Could that be part of it? He even remembered seeing a tiny, almost invisible QR code sticker on her mailbox once, which he'd assumed was for a gardening club or something mundane. Now, the idea festered. This was the seed. This was the loophole. If Karen's constant, over-the-top, complaints and rule-bending had been rooted in her desire for ultimate control over the neighborhood, what if she herself was violating the very essence of what made it residential? The sheer irony was almost too delicious. He felt a surge of cold, focused determination. This wasn't just about getting even anymore. It was about exposing a hypocrite and using her own weapon, the rules, against her. The fragmented observations of Karen's peculiar activities, now cemented by the discovery of that obscure zoning clause, transformed Alex's simmering resentment into a cold, calculated strategy. He was no longer just a victim. He was a detective. And Karen's meticulously maintained facade was his crime scene. His investigation began subtly, almost imperceptibly. He started by dedicating specific hours each day to observation, not just from his window, but from his car parked down the street, pretending to be on a call, or during his daily walks around the block. He noted the precise times of the frequent, unmarked white vans that arrived, often parking briefly, then leaving. These weren't standard Amazon deliveries. The packages were always large, sometimes oddly shaped, and too numerous for a single household's consumption. He logged vehicle makes, models, and partial license plates, cross-referencing them with public business registries, hoping to find a pattern. He meticulously documented the stream of different private cars that pulled up to Karen's driveway, their occupants, usually dressed professionally, hurrying inside for short, unannounced appointments before departing. These weren't social calls. There was an air of hurried transaction about them, a lack of casual lingering. He used the timestamp feature on his phone camera, discreetly taking photos and short videos from his yard, ensuring he captured the activity without invading Karen's privacy, but simply documenting what was publicly visible. Every delivery, every visitor, every unusual sound became a data point in his burgeoning dossier. He learned her routine, her early morning dog walks, her designated grocery days, the consistent evening quiet. It allowed him to predict opportune moments for discreet observation. His digital sleuthing intensified. That tiny QR code on her mailbox, which he'd dismissed as insignificant months ago, became his obsession. He carefully scanned it, only to find it led to a surprisingly sophisticated, albeit subtly branded website for Karen's bespoke creations, offering custom design consultations and handcrafted artisan goods, all operating from her private studio. The website listed a generic residential address, clearly Karen's, and offered appointments. This was a goldmine. He found client testimonials praising her efficiency and home studio's comfortable atmosphere. He scoured local online craft fair listings and community boards, discovering Karen regularly participated, always listing her home address for pre-orders or consultations. He found social media profiles for Karen's bespoke creations, showing images of her elaborate craft room, packed with inventory, and posts advertising open studio days, clear commercial events happening at a residential address. He downloaded every image, screenshotted every mention, meticulously saving URLs and dates. He subscribed to her newsletter, found through the website, which frequently announced new product launches and exclusive home appointments. Each piece of digital evidence was a nail in Karen's perfectly manicured coffin. The sheer audacity of her operating a full-fledged, undeclared business from her residential property while simultaneously policing every minor infraction of her neighbors fueled Alex's determination. The irony was palpable, almost poetic. He even managed to find public records of her property's initial zoning classification, confirming it was indeed R1, strictly residential, with very limited exceptions for home-based businesses that generated no external traffic or significant deliveries. Karen's operation clearly violated those limits. As Alex gathered his evidence, Karen, perhaps sensing his increased activity or simply being her usual self, began to escalate her own petty acts. She started leaving passive-aggressive notes on his mailbox, complaining about leaves from his tree blowing onto her meticulously swept sidewalk. She started pointing her motion-activated floodlights directly into his bedroom window at night, ostensibly for security. One evening, she even called non-emergency services, falsely claiming Alex's dog was barking excessively, despite his dog being quietly asleep inside. Alex documented every single one of these incidents with meticulous detail, dates, times, descriptions, and photographic proof if possible. He noted her increasingly exaggerated reactions to minor things, like the sound of his lawnmower or the laughter from his backyard barbecue. He even found a public online forum where Karen had anonymously posted a rant about new neighbors disrupting the peace with their noisy, unruly behavior, clearly referring to him, further demonstrating her pattern of aggressive, preemptive attacks. He understood that these escalating acts weren't just annoying, they were proof of her character, her willingness to weaponize minor issues which would only underscore his own, more significant, complaint. He began to consult discreetly with a trusted lawyer he knew from a previous job, a kind, sharp-witted woman named Sarah, who specialized in property law. He presented his evidence in carefully curated batches, maintaining a calm, objective demeanor. Sarah, initially skeptical, grew increasingly impressed with the depth and breadth of Alex's findings. She confirmed that he had a legitimate, albeit complex, case. She advised him on the precise language to use in his complaint, the specific sections of the zoning code to cite, and the importance of presenting the evidence in a clear, irrefutable manner. She warned him that Karen would likely fight back viciously, perhaps with counter-complaints or attempts to discredit him, but reassured him that his meticulous documentation was his strongest shield. This consultation solidified Alex's resolve. He was no longer operating on a whim, but on solid legal ground. The process was slow, arduous, and emotionally draining, but every piece of evidence he collected, every legal phrase he learned, felt like a small victory. He was building an unassailable fortress of facts, brick by painstaking brick, preparing for the day he would finally confront Karen not with anger, but with irrefutable proof. With his meticulously assembled dossier in hand, a thick binder overflowing with time-stamped photos, screenshots of Karen's website and social media, logs of deliveries and visitor traffic, and detailed notes on zoning ordinances, Alex felt a quiet, powerful surge of confidence he hadn't known since Karen had first towed his car. The day he walked into the city's zoning and planning department felt momentous. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and stale coffee, a stark contrast to the fresh, early morning air of his driveway. But here, in this unassuming government building, was where his victory would begin. He approached the counter, laid his binder down, and calmly requested to file a formal complaint regarding a residential property violating commercial zoning regulations. The clerk, a tired-looking woman with kind eyes, initially seemed to brace herself for another routine neighbor dispute, but as Alex began to explain, methodically presenting his evidence, her expression shifted. She flipped through the pages, her eyebrows rising with each new piece of undeniable proof. The sheer volume and detail of Alex's documentation clearly surprised her. She confirmed that, yes, based on this preliminary evidence, a formal investigation would be initiated. The process would take time, she warned, involving official notices, property inspections, and a potential hearing. But Alex felt a calm resolve. He had done his part. The bureaucratic machine would now grind forward. The first ripple of the coming storm arrived a week later in the form of an official-looking envelope delivered to Karen's perfectly manicured doorstep. Alex, observing discreetly from his living room window, saw her retrieve it from her mailbox. Her initial reaction was dismissive. She probably assumed it was junk mail or a new HOA directive. But as she tore it open and read the contents, her posture stiffened. Her head snapped up, her eyes narrowing as she glared directly at Alex's house. He could almost feel the heat of her fury through the glass. Her face, usually composed, contorted into a mask of shock and outrage. The next few days saw Karen in a state of agitated disbelief. She was on the phone constantly, pacing her porch, her voice rising in indignant squawks that carried clearly across the quiet neighborhood. She looked frantic, disheveled, a stark departure from her usual pristine appearance. She attempted to corner other neighbors, launching into furious, disjointed rants about harassment and baseless accusations from certain individuals, a thinly veiled reference to Alex. She painted herself as the victim of a vindictive, unstable neighbor, trying to rally support. But the years of her own petty grievances had worn thin the patience of many residents, and her pleas mostly fell on deaf ears, or met with polite but firm excuses to leave. This failure to garner neighborhood sympathy only fueled her rage. Karen's counterattacks against Alex intensified, losing any pretense of subtlety. She filed no less than 3 separate complaints against him with the HOA, one for his trash bins being visible for too long on pickup day, another alleging that his mailbox was improperly mounted, according to obscure guidelines, and a third, wildly exaggerated claim about his dog barking continuously for hours. Alex, forewarned by his lawyer Sarah, simply forwarded these to her, knowing they were frivolous. Sarah advised him to keep a meticulous log of all Karen's retaliatory actions, including dates, times, and a brief description, along with any relevant photos or videos. He meticulously documented each instance of her glaring at him, her loud, angry phone calls made within earshot of his property, and even the time she accidentally knocked over one of his garden gnomes while ostensibly sweeping her sidewalk. One morning, he found a dead mouse left strategically on his doormat, a clear, disgusting message. It was a vile, childish act, but Alex, rather than reacting emotionally, calmly put on gloves, photographed it, and then disposed of it, adding it to his ever-growing dossier. He knew Karen was desperate, and desperate people made mistakes. Her escalating harassment was inadvertently strengthening his case, demonstrating her pattern of aggressive behavior and her vindictive nature. She even sent him a thinly veiled cease-and-desist letter from a local, notoriously aggressive lawyer, accusing him of slander and harassment and threatening legal action if he didn't drop his malicious complaint. Alex forwarded it directly to Sarah, who merely chuckled. "Standard bluster," she commented. "She's scared." Alex remained composed, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to Karen's increasingly unhinged behavior. He understood that this was a chess match and Karen, in her blind fury, was simply knocking over her own pieces. He had played his legal gambit, and now, All he had to do was wait for the consequences to unfold. The day of the zoning board hearing arrived, shrouded in a tense, almost palpable quietness that belied the storm brewing beneath the surface. Alex, dressed in his best suit, felt a nervous flutter in his stomach, but beneath it, a bedrock of calm resolve. He had prepared meticulously, every fact, every photo, every timeline committed to memory. The hearing room was stark, filled with rows of empty chairs, and a long table where 3 stern-faced board members sat. Karen was already there, perched rigidly in her seat, flanked by a young, overzealous lawyer who looked barely out of law. Our school. Her face was a mask of furious indignation, her eyes darting nervously between the board members and Alex, a desperate defiance radiating from her. When Alex's turn came, he approached the podium, taking a deep breath. He began to speak, his voice clear and steady, narrating the story not with anger, but with cold, objective facts. He started with the arbitrary towing of his car from his own driveway, establishing the initial violation, then systematically presented his overwhelming evidence of Karen's commercial activities, the detailed logs of unusual traffic and deliveries, the meticulously sourced screenshots of her Karen's Bespoke Creations website advertising home studio, consultations, and open studio days, the social media posts showcasing her inventory and client appointments, the damning QR code leading directly to her undeclared business. He referenced the precise municipal code sections, citing how her repeated, significant commercial traffic and operations violated the very definition of a residential R1 zone, imposing an unreasonable burden on the neighborhood's character. He even presented the log of Karen's escalating petty harassment against him, not as a point of contention, but as a demonstration of her pattern of behavior and her response to being challenged. Each piece of evidence landed with the weight of undeniable truth chipping away at Karen's facade. When it was Karen's turn, her lawyer attempted to discredit Alex, accusing him of harassment, obsession, and attempting to slander a small, innocent home hobbyist. Karen herself then burst into a rambling, emotional tirade, denying everything, claiming Alex was a vengeful nuisance who simply couldn't stand her success, resorting to personal attacks and self-pity rather than addressing the specific charges. She waved her hands dismissively, her voice rising in indignation. But she offered no counter-evidence, no logical rebuttal, only bluster and indignation. She presented no permits for her studio, no records of proper business registration for home operations, no legitimate explanation for the constant parade of client cars and delivery vans. The board members listened patiently, their expressions unreadable, occasionally interjecting with sharp, precise questions that Karen and her lawyer struggled to answer without contradicting themselves. The contrast between Alex's calm, factual presentation and Karen's emotional, unsubstantiated defense was stark and undeniably compelling. It became clear that her blustering was simply a thinly veiled attempt to hide the undeniable truth. After what felt like an eternity, the board members excused themselves for deliberation. The silence in the room was excruciating, broken only by Karen's agitated whispers to her lawyer. Alex, however, sat quietly, his heart pounding but his mind surprisingly clear. He had done everything he could. When the board members returned, the chairman, a distinguished-looking man, cleared his throat. "Ms. Hayes," he began, addressing Karen, "the board has reviewed the extensive evidence presented by Mr. Miller, as well as your testimony. While we acknowledge the importance of supporting small home-based businesses, the evidence overwhelmingly demonstrates a clear pattern of commercial activity at your residential property that exceeds the permissible limits for an R1 zone." Karen's face paled. "Therefore," the chairman continued, his voice firm, "this board finds your property, Karen's address, to be in violation of city zoning ordinance, specific ordinance number cited by Alex. You will be issued a substantial fine, effective immediately. Furthermore, you will be ordered to cease all commercial operations from this residential address within 30 days. Failure to comply will result in escalating daily fines and potential reclassification of your property as a commercial zone, which would entail significant tax increases, mandatory structural changes, and the requirement for commercial permits, and parking, rendering it unsuitable for residential use. Karen stared, her mouth agape, her eyes wide with shock and dawning horror. The color drained from her face as the full weight of the verdict crashed down on her. Her perfectly constructed world of self-righteousness crumbled in that instant. She had thought she was immune to consequence, but the rules she so loved to weaponize against others had finally been turned against her, with devastating effect. Her lawyer looked equally stunned, already calculating the immense legal and financial ramifications. Alex watched her, a quiet, profound sense of satisfaction washing over him. There was no triumphant smirk on his face, no outward display of glee. His victory wasn't about gloating. It was about the restoration of peace, the vindication of his rights, and the quiet triumph of justice. He had taken her most aggressive, most violating act, the towing of his car from his own driveway, and used the very system she abused to deliver a consequence that was both legal and exquisitely poetic. As Karen stumbled out of the hearing room, a defeated, humiliated wreck, Alex remained for a moment, absorbing the stillness. His driveway, his home, his peace, finally felt truly his again. Karen thought she had the power, Alex's voiceover concluded, a calm, reflective tone. She learned that sometimes the biggest battles are won not with anger, but with a rulebook, relentless patience, and the cold, hard facts. My driveway was finally mine again. And her house? Well, it was no longer just a house. It was a very expensive, very quiet lesson in boundaries.